Hello, and welcome to this overview of SELJUK, Byzantium Besieged, designed by me. This is a project that I have had in the works for several years, since before the pandemic started, right as the pandemic started, and I'm very excited because today is the day that it gets officially, I guess we'll call it, announced and added to the GMT Games P500 list. This is a new Levian campaign game set in Anatolia, Eastern Anatolia, specifically parts of Armenia, Syria, and is set in the 11th century, right around the Battle of Manzikert, which happened in 1071. So the game takes place in the 4 years leading up to the Battle of Manzikert and uses the Levian campaign system to model operational maneuver and warfare between the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire and the Seljuk Turks. As you can see here, you are looking at sort of a setup, one setup in the game, this being for the 1068 scenario or the campaign, depending on how you want to play it. And what you can see is this beautiful map done by Robert Altbauer, who was the artist on Inferno, and has done some other work in Levian campaign as well. This is his rendition of Eastern Turkey, Eastern Anatolia in this period. On the map, you've got some of the pieces, and we'll take a look at those and exactly what the game covers and how you play it and what's new with Levian campaign. But if you're not familiar with Levian campaign, I thought it would be best to do a quick overview of what makes the system so special and so interesting compared to other war games. Obviously, you can see already that it's a point-to-point system, and it does use cards, and it does use wooden cylinders and wooden bits for the pieces. So it's a very attractive system. So let's take a look at what SELJUK is doing new for Levian campaign, which is now a series that has 3 games released into the wild and another 2 on the P500 list. This is the first one that's going to be set in sort of Asia Minor, and some might even say Eastern Europe if you consider Constantinople the utmost extent of Europe. Constantinople does figure in the game somewhat, although we are focused primarily on the border between the Muslim and Orthodox Christian world at this time. So let's take a look. Let's go a little bit closer in, and I'll give you a little quick run through of what Levian campaign is all about. So Levian campaign, first and foremost, was a system designed by Voko Runke, who you may know from Coin, and it sought to model the feudalism and feudal obligations of soldiers in Middle Ages warfare. And so the very first place that we start when we're talking about Levian campaign is the calendar. At the top of every map, you're going to have a calendar. Each calendar box is going to be represented by a turn. In past games in Levian campaign, the calendar boxes have been 40 days. That was sort of the prototypical Western European feudal contract. In SELJUK, we've condensed the scale a little bit. We're talking about seasonal turns. So instead of 40 days, we're talking about 90 days. Each turn in the game is going to be of a different season, spring, summer, autumn. There is a winter sequence in this game, but we're not going to play through winter like you do in other Levian campaign games. Rather, winter is going to be sort of a scoring interphase before you begin the next year. Here we can see the summer of 1069 and autumn as well, and then we would have a winter sequence and then go into spring. Now, what you can also see here are 2 different types of pieces that are going to live on the calendar. One is going to be these cylinders, which when on the map are going to represent armies, and we'll get to that in a second. But these represent lords, historical people that were alive at this time in history that commanded forces. When the turn marker reaches the season that a lord cylinder is located, you are able to muster that lord onto the map and into play. The other type of piece on the calendar are these service markers. This represents how long an army would be sort of levied or mustered to stay in the field for. Now, these 2 markers represent pieces already on the map, the top one being the Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan. He's over here located off screen in the city of Ani. And when his service marker is on the calendar, that shows you when his service limit is up. So if the turn marker ever gets to this box, then this army, if it doesn't find a way to extend its service, because these markers can be moved forwards and backwards through the course of play through different effects, if it is not extended, when the turn marker gets here, this army will disband and we will remove his army from the map. Now, each army and lord in the game is represented by one of these lord mats. These you're going to keep off to the side in front of you, and when a lord is in play on the map, you will have these to show you what exactly his force pool makeup is. Here you can see the different unit types in Seljuk, some of the new ones that are coming to the system, and you can see that Alp Arslan has 4 Turkic horse and 2 Gulam. We'll talk about those in a second. It also lists where this lord's seat is. These are sort of, consider them home spaces for these lords. A lot of actions depend on how far away you are from your seat. It also denotes whether or not this lord is a commander, and he is in the overall commander for the Seljuk side. He is the Sultan, after all. Below forces, we've got room for where your units will go when they are routed in battle here. And then in the bottom here, we've got an assets and vassals box. This represents what this lord has currently with his army, and who he can muster to add forces to his armies. So on the right here, we have got some vassals. And one of the actions you can take in this game before you go on campaign is to raise these vassals and get the depicted units on your lord mat. So you can see here that Alp Arslan could levy a vassal that is 2 infantry units or 2 Turkic horse units. On the left, we've got his assets. In this game, in other levying campaign games, there are different types of transport that were only usable in certain seasons. Because we're talking about the highlands of eastern Anatolia, which was a fairly dry, arid place, and it was mostly a landlocked conflict, there's only one type of transport asset in Seljuk Byzantium Besieged, and that is the cart, the erstwhile cart. Now, this doesn't literally represent one cart, obviously. It represents a baggage train, or an oxen train of livestock, or whatever type of burden system that the army is using can carry. But for simplicity's sake, a cart is your basic transport unit in this game, and that is the only transport unit in this game. He's also got coin, which can be used to spend for various effects in the game. Coin's going to be very important in Seljuk because you can use coin for a number of different things, but one of the main things you're going to use coin for is to extend the service of your army. He's also got provender. This is food, and this is where the logistics of levying campaign comes into play. Food is important for lords and armies because every time they take an action that involves movement or combat, after they are done with their turn, they are going to have to feed their army. And that is where they're going to be gaining and expending provender to feed all of the soldiers that they've got with them. Now, we are talking about a point-to-point map here, and we can see Alp Arslan here, his army in Ani. You'll also notice that Ani, one of his seats, it matches the icon on his cylinder. That is important, like I said, for a number of different actions you can take. During the campaign phase, you are going to build a deck of action cards. You're going to pre-program your entire side's movement based on these action cards. And there are what are called command cards. There are command cards for every lord in the game. There's 4 for each. And based on who you have in play, like here, for example, you will be able to create a deck, depending on what season you're in, of a number of commands, number of turns that you're going to be able to take. You can kind of see up here that in summer it's going to be 8 cards, in autumn it'll be 7 cards, and in spring it will also be 7 cards. That can change with some various random events, which we'll get to, but you're going to construct your side's turn by taking these cards, creating a deck up to the number of the season calls for, and then turning them face down. And then when it comes to your turn, you are going to take one of the cards, flip it over, and execute that particular lord's turn. Now, the number in the upper right is the number of commands that he has, and there's a whole menu of actions that you can take with each army when it's their turn. Some cost 1 command, some cost all of the commands, but in general, what you're going to be doing when you flip a card is you're going to take that army, you're probably going to move. So we can see here Alp Arslan moving from Ani to Mempet. He could then move to Theodosiopolis. You'll notice that this is the border here between the Seljuk Sultanate and the Eastern Roman Empire. When he moves to an enemy fortified position, he must stop. And there, that will limit some of the actions he can take. He can then potentially put that location under siege. He can try and storm the walls. And he can also do something very important for the Seljuk player, and that is ravage. Ravaging a location not only gets you victory points, but it also gets you valuable supplies. So when Alp Arslan ravages, he will collect loot, food, and he'll be able to supply his army with the belongings that he takes. Now, in Seljuk, it's a very asymmetric game. So unlike, say, Nevsky or Almoravid, you're going to be scoring points differently depending on which side you're playing. For the Seljuk side, during the winter, they're going to score bonus points if the loot that they're able to gather by ravaging various locations through the empire, and if they're able to carry it home during the winter phase, meaning they can trace a path of friendly locations back to their seats, they will score some bonus points. And to make sure that the Seljuk player is really focused on ravaging, there is another mechanic at play for them, which is what's called the Seljuk unity. This represents sort of the political collection of lords under the Sultan's banner that have agreed to come into the Eastern Roman Empire and cause all sorts of chaos. But essentially, every year, during every winter, the Seljuk player needs to have a certain amount of spaces on the map covered in either ravaged, conquered, or, as we see here, ruined markers. The more damage that they cause the Romans, the less penalty there will be. If they can meet the threshold that the year requires, they're going to lose no victory points. If they fall short of the threshold that the year requires, they're going to lose victory points equal to the difference. So it's important that the Seljuk player really takes a look at the map and really plots out how their year is going to go, that their campaign is successful, that they're able to bring home loot, that they're able to ravage the countryside, ruin cities, or possibly even conquer Eastern Roman strongholds. On the Roman side, or the Eastern Roman side, we'll say, they are going to score points very similarly to other levy and campaign games that you may have played. Conquering enemy territory will give them victory points. They'll also be able to get victory points for ravaging as well. So both sides are playing a very different game in terms of how they're scoring. There's no loot to bring home to Constantinople. Constantinople is the richest city in the empire, and they want to keep it that way. So they're going to try and keep the Roman Empire together. But what the Roman player does have to worry about, and you may have been asking yourself, what are all these markers all over the map? What are all these different provinces? Well, let's talk about that. So here we can see some of the Eastern Roman Empire and the way some of their territory. We've got one of the lords here. This is Nikephoros Vrienios. He was one of the commanders at Manzikert. He's here in Sevastia, which is a town in central Turkey or central Anatolia. You've also got these purple lines, and these represent different military administrative districts that were called thema, or themes. And these thema were essentially commanded by a local commander and contained sort of troops sourced from the local population and sometimes professional soldiers in the Roman Empire as well, who were responsible only for operating in those areas. And so in the game, this is represented by these, themata. These are local frontier troops that can be used in a variety of ways, but their primary mission is to defend against Seljuk incursion. So when a Seljuk army approaches a fortified position inside of a thema, the Roman player is allowed to declare, if a siege begins, how many of these defenders are located inside of that particular fortress. So we see here that there are 3 available units to defend Tefriki. And so let's say the Roman player says, I would like to defend Tefriki with this one Tahmada unit. And we'll talk about units in a second. That unit would then be inside that particular fortress and serve as the garrison against it. Now, the upside of that is that it gives the Roman player a garrison. The downside is that if this siege is successful and Alp Arslan conquers Tefriki, this Themata is permanently eliminated from the game. And these are very hard to bring back. There are some events that can bring them back, but in general, once they're gone, they are gone. Now, they can also be levied by the Roman emperor, who can pick them up on his march. That's a very unique power to the Roman emperor. Normally in levy and campaign, you can only muster new troops and vassals at the beginning of the turn during the planning or muster phase. But in this game, the Roman emperor, as he did on the march to Manzikert, is able to levy these troops directly to his lord Matt. So we can see here he took 2 infantry units from the Sevastia theme or thema and put them, and now he has 2 additional infantry units in his army. Again, if they are defeated in battle, they are permanently eliminated. So judicious use of these is very, very important. Now, the final use of the themata is defensively against ravaging. So we talked about how the Turks really want to be ravaging the countryside. Well, if a Turkic army rolls in and decides they want to try and ravage Tefriki here, for example, the Roman player can select one of his themata to try and defend against that ravage. When he selects this, for example, this infantry unit, he would then roll against this infantry unit's armor stat, which is on one of the player aids. And if he's successful, the ravage is canceled and the Seljuk player has wasted a command that turn trying to ravage the countryside. Because remember, these are defensive frontier troops. They're trying to protect the borders of the empire from Turkic incursion. If he fails, he is defeated. Turkic raiders have eliminated the defenders, and they have successfully ravaged the location, gotten some loot, and are potentially on their way home with their newfound riches. In addition to command cards, which are going to power your campaign turn, you're also going to have a deck that is unique to each player. Each person's going to have one, of Arts of War. If you've played other Levy and campaign games, you know how these work, but if you haven't, you're essentially looking at cards that have dual use capability. The top half is going to be a random event. These are usually always good for you, and you're going to draw 2 of them at the beginning of each season. So the beginning of each turn, you're going to draw 2 events from this deck. These do all sorts of things. Every event is unique. You can see some of these here on these playtest cards that I have created. But in general, this is the Seljuk deck. You can see sort of what some of these effects are. A lot of them on the top here are actually around the Normans, who are mercenaries of the Romans. We'll talk about that in a second. The bottom half of the card is going to be what are called capabilities. Capabilities are special abilities that you can levy during the planning phase to your specific armies to give them some sort of special ability. So in this case here, if you wanted to levy the Javelins card, you can look through your deck using, one of your muster points. Look through your deck. You might see Javelins and say, hey, I like the look of that. I want some of my infantry to be able to throw some Javelins. And then you can equip this card to either this lord or this lord's army if they are in play. Other cards allow you to equip to any lord. Some of them are limited, so you can see here that the elite Gulam cavalry, which is the elite Turkish heavy cavalry of the time, can't be equipped to either of the Norman lords. There's another one. This one here, Parthian shot. That's sort of the bread and butter archery skill of the Turks coming through here. This can be equipped to any lord. Support from Aleppo. Some of these cards say all. All means that it affects your entire faction. So here we see Marwanid Alliance. This has really great effects for the Turkic ability to return loot during the winter. And when it says all, you don't equip it to a specific army, you just put it on your side of the board and it affects your entire faction. And as you can see, there's plenty of these. So far, there are 22 cards in all for each deck, and each one is unique. And so you're going to be using these to generate strategies and builds for your lords. So for example, so here I am with Arasigi, who is the brother-in-law to the Sultan Alp Arslan. You can see that he's got 5 Turkic horse in his army. That's a pretty potent force, but Turkic horse are not very capable in melee combat. And Arasigi might decide, or the Seljuk player might decide, I really want those 5 Turkic horse to have some effect when we get to the melee phase of combat, if I need it. Well, you might look through the deck and you might find shock tactics. Shock tactics allows half of a lord's Turkic horse to melee at 1/2 a hit each. That gives 3 of his Turkic horse the ability to melee at half, so he can do 1.5 hits. And so when we levy it, we spend one of his lordship points during the muster phase, and we just simply tuck the card underneath the mat to show that Arasigi has trained in shock tactics, and now his units are a little bit better. And this is really the heart of the strategy of the game, is figuring out how to use these cards with your specific lords and force loadouts to make maximum effectiveness of the tools you have in front of you. Now, I've mentioned quite a bit the different types of units just in passing, but let's go through and see what kind of new units are coming to Seljuk Byzantium Besieged. Now, keeping in mind that this is all playtest components and playtest art, I wanted to take you through some of the special units in the game. Here we can see a couple of the lords on the Roman side. We've got Chadeturios, who is the Duke of Antioch, basically the head of the city there, the commander at Antioch. He comes into play with a couple of units you may have seen. So these are infantry. These are going to be equivalent to your men-at-arms. Basically no change from Nevsky or other games in the series. You've also got militia, again, very similar foot units to other games in the series. But it's when we get to the mounted units that things really change. And there are different types of mounted units in this game, many different types, because this part of the world and this part of the medieval era was all about mounted combat. The Seljuks obviously were very powerful when it came to mounted bow tactics, and so that's reflected with these blue pieces here. These are Turkic horse, as you've seen previously in the video. I don't have them in wedge shape, but they should be triangular shaped like this. They're going to be really fast. They're going to have mounted combat abilities that is superior to any other unit in the game, but they're going to be very weak. They don't have a lot of armor, and so they're much better at hit and run tactics. The other type of mounted unit that's unique to the Romans is going to be this one here. I don't know if you can see it, but this is purple. And most of the color schemes around the Eastern Romans is the Tyrian red or Tyrian purple. These are Tahmada, And these are the essential bread and butter mounted professional units of the Eastern Roman Empire of the time. They wore lamellar armor or chainmail. They were well equipped to have range combat from their horse. They could also use melee combat from their horse. The vaunted Byzantine cavalry, mace tactics that they used, those are reflected in the game as well. And these are mounted units in addition. Very good all-around unit, not excelling at any one thing, but they are a really good, solid foundation to build capabilities on, as we talked about. You'll also notice that the Roman emperor here, Romanos Theoyenis, has got 2 Turkic horse under him. And you are not mistaken. The Romans at the time would employ Turks from the steppe of Asia as mercenaries in their army. And they did so at Manzikert and in some of the campaigns around Manzikert. And that is why you see Turkic horse on both sides, though the Turks will have more. Here we have a look at Alp Arslan, the Sultan again. Obviously, you know he has Turkic horse. He can also muster some infantry, but he's also got these gulam. These are the elite heavy cavalry of the Seljuk Empire. They are primarily melee. They are armored, heavily armored, and they are a real force to be reckoned with. But there are not many of them. They were an elite corps, and so you're not going to have these everywhere. Alp Arslan has a couple. There's another lord who was sort of their commander, whom will have some, but otherwise they're a very precious resource. You don't want to lose these. They're very powerful in battle, can swing the tide. And it wouldn't be a game about Byzantium if we didn't talk about some of the special units that can come into play. The first of which are going to be these Norman knights. These are going to be knights as you would have seen them in Nevsky or other games in Levian Campaign. No real changes there. But these are going to belong to the Norman mercenaries that Byzantium was employing at the time. Famous ones being Robert Crepin and Roussel de Bayeux, both of whom fought in Eastern Anatolia during this period. These knights, they're, again, not many of them, but they're very powerful in melee if they can withstand the initial Turkic arrow barrage. And here we see a special vassal that only the Roman Emperor can levy if they play a card, and that contains, of course, the Varangian Guard. Now, it should be white. I don't have a white bar, but in general, this here is going to be the Varangian Guard. Varangian Guard are very fun. They deal 3 hits in melee on the first round, and they're very heavily armored, but once they hit, they can't hit again in the battle. So you're kind of like dropping a bomb in your combats when you have the Varangian Guard. This mounted white unit here would be the Hetaerea, most notable as being sort of foreign-born cavalry mercenaries that were an elite bodyguard to the emperor. Those can come into play on this single vassal, 1 Varangian, 1 Hetaerea. The Hetaerea, again, very good, similar to the Turkic Gulam, though not quite as good in archery. But they were also typically Northmen, Norse peoples, and other foreign-born cavalry units that accompanied the emperor and made up the part of, at least, the division of the Scholae Palatini that accompanied the emperor to Manzikert. While we're on the topic of Normans, let's talk about one last thing that can happen in this game, in Seljuk Byzantium Besieged. Just trying to give you a sense of everything that can, everything new here. There are some new event cards that are once per game, so that's kind of new to the system. As you can see here, we've got the Siege of Bari, which did happen historically in 1070 and 1071 in Italy. That was the last Byzantine holding in the Italian peninsula at this time. Very important. And as you can see, the star means once per game. Once the Siege of Bari happens, it can't happen again. But the other thing that can happen in this game is that some of the lords on either side are not necessarily the most loyal. Obviously, the Normans were mercenaries and loyal only really to coin, and they had ambitions to carve out their own petty kingdoms in Anatolia. And so sometimes, in random event sequences, like this one here, you might get a loyalty check, and this will cause a roll against that particular lord to see if he's going to stay on the side he's in or if he's going to switch sides. And in the case of Robert Crepin and the Norman Pay Revolt, it is possible that Robert goes from Roman Robert Crepin to Turkic Robert Crepin, representing his rebellion against the Roman Emperor in 1069, and sort of the resources that the Romans had to spend to go fight and capture him. There are other lords that can switch sides. Roussel de Bayeux is another one, who historically, while he was at the Battle of Manzikert, as soon as that was over, he did have designs on carving out his own kingdom around Ankara. So he has got a Turkic version as well. And then the brother-in-law of the Sultan, Arasigi, also has a Roman version, because historically he did join the Romans. He left the Turkic camp and came over to Constantinople. This is where the Romans called him Chrysoskoulos, and he served in the court of Romanos Theoyenis until the end of, well, I won't call it a war, but until the end of the conflict with the Turks after Manzikert. So all in all, a lot of new stuff coming to the system, and really excited that it's finally out there. Obviously, I haven't touched on everything that's going on here, but this is a real primer to take you through Levian Campaign and what's new with this game. So that is a first look at Seljuk, Byzantium Besieged, designed by me. Obviously, everything here is prototype. This is the physical prototype, but the map art is near final. Everything else I made from scratch. And sourced components for. So the final game will obviously look a lot nicer than this, but it is on P500 now on gmtgames.com, and I will leave a link in the description where you can go if this looks interesting to you to get those P500 numbers up. This would be Levian Campaign Volume 6 if we get there, and if you choose to support the game, obviously my many and heartfelt thanks. This is a labor of love. Going in from the beginning, I said, even if nothing comes of this as I start designing this game, at least I will have created a game that I want to play about an era in history that gets far too few games, and I can at least play it with my friends. So the fact that we're even at this point blows my mind, and I hope you like what you see here. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I will hopefully be able to do some more videos on the game, potentially maybe take you through some of the other things about it, down the line. But I think that's a good first overview for what you can expect from this new entry into Levian Campaign, which is admittedly a very somewhat obscure topic and setting, but one that I think is very cool and very interesting. Thank you for watching.